Thanks, Laurence. And moving on to our next topic, and lately we've seen a growing popularity for the four-day working week, with a number of European governments testing this out among their public service workforces. Early reports suggest it's a winner among staff, perhaps no surprise there, with workers reporting feeling less stressed and improved health and work-life balance. It's not yet clear if there has been a productivity or a budgetary impact, and the employers involved are likely to keep those results under wraps. But Laurence, this looks like a slow evolution toward more flexible working across the board. Is that a positive thing for employer and employee relations?
Oh my gosh, I certainly hope so. For the 30 plus years I've been studying the sort of the future of work, right? We've always been talking about automating the boring stuff, making work more meaningful, and giving people more life back to actually live. If this is finally happening, I think it's magnificent. I'm certainly dubious in how smooth any transition like this will be, because I think our organizations and leaders would have a lot to learn to make this work effectively. Having said that, in the last 24 months, we've transformed the world of work due to COVID. So maybe this is just the next stage of that. Because look, it's very clear that work typically expands to fill the hours available. And if you have a much tighter time frame, then generally people step forward and manage much more tightly to that, and can be far more productive. I think it does really, really push to something you talked about earlier, which is, are we actually effectively transforming our organizations so that a lot of the administration, the bureaucracy, the duplication, the paper pushing has truly been automated out, has been taken out, has been thrown away, has been discarded? Because I would guess that most of us probably spend 20% of our working week on non-value added work that could potentially be easily automated. And if that is so, then the 4-hour work week could perhaps be a blessing in disguise and give us all time to find a way to give back, to spend more time with family, or to work on personal projects, side hustles, businesses, and create our own gig economy opportunities as well. So, some really interesting implications there. But I think we'll have to wait to see how it works out.
We know that more hours doesn't necessarily mean more work being done, but there must be at least some cost to reducing an employee's time at work by 20% every week. Are those extra costs likely to hold back employers in Asia from following this trend?
Now that's an interesting question. And again, this might be tougher in Northeast Asia than Southeast Asia. If you look at, Korea and Japan, there's traditionally, especially if you work with the larger conglomerates, a tradition of overwork. In fact, in Japan, there's a term for death from overwork, and it's, a sad reality. But even there are organizations experimenting with 4-hour work week. So I do think this will happen. I don't think there's necessarily massive costs for the employer if, they have been removing the nonsense work, the low value added work from the equation, and giving people more opportunity to focus on what adds value for the customer or their internal stakeholders. So I think this is still an open question for us to, perhaps, come back and reflect upon in 6 months.
And finally, is it absolutely certain that workers want more time to switch off like this? Is there a risk that a 3-day weekend, every weekend, will actually create a work-life imbalance in the other direction?
That is possible. And I do remember when I worked in Korea, and told some of my staff to go home at 6 or 7 p.m. at night and not work late in the office. They actually used staying late in the office to avoid family obligations. So certainly for them, this would not be a popular idea. It may well be a generational thing, right? It may be another 5 or 10 years until this becomes comfortable and familiar. It may be that people coming through university and high school now are going to think it's totally normal to actually be able to spend a decent part of the week on things that matter to them, as well as having meaningful work for the other 4 days a week. I suspect, a bit like digital transformation, it may be those of us in our 40s and 50s who'll be a bit lost if we don't have to go into the office, or, even work from home for, 40, 50, 60 hours a week? I think, you might want to describe this as the great recalibration. And, can people actually readjust to something like this? I don't know. I think it's a really interesting, very provocative question you're putting out there, Paul. And I'd love to see some feedback from the viewers on what they think about this, and perhaps continuing this conversation.